Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to day 2 of the inaugural Me Convention. For those of you who are not wearing your headphones, I am so sorry. It's not me, it's actually you. Everyone should be wearing a headphone, and you should tune that to channel 2. That's for this stage. For the rest of the day, you can wear these headphones, keep them, and choose between the channels, okay? So if you feel like a multitasker, you can see this and listen to Amber's stage over there, but that might get a little weird. So, welcome back. We have a very exciting day ahead of us. First of all, who went out to see Iggy Azalea last night? Because the Me Convention did not just stop over here. Wow, we have a few people. I heard some very innovative stories about last night. I hope you had a great time. We will continue just as creatively on this stage today. I'm really excited about our first speaker and the first interview over here. First of all, I'd like to point out again, though, that we want to make these sessions very interactive. So who here has not yet downloaded the Me Convention app? You might be the only one. Everyone. That's fantastic. So there you go. Everyone take out your phones. Just remember, in the menu, choose Ask and Vote so that you can submit your questions to our next speaker, Amy Cole, because our wonderful interviewer, Guy Kawasaki, is going to bring them up at the very end, so you can actually participate in the dialogue. So we are now talking about an app that is being used by over 700 million people in the world. Its users under 25 actually spend over half an hour every single day on this app. It's pretty incredible, and our speaker is responsible for business development in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. She will be talking here about the shift in communication from the sort of staged image to the live moment. What does that do to brands? What does that do to the influencers using Instagram? And what does it do to the audience? And she will be joined afterwards by the inimitable Guy Kawasaki, the chief evangelist of Canva and the brand ambassador of Mercedes-Benz. But first of all, please welcome the director of business development for Europe, Middle East, and Africa of Instagram, Amy Cole.
Great. Good morning. This is weird to hear myself and to not hear everything that's going on out there, so bear with me, but make sure that you have your headphones on. Cool, so Guy and I are going to chat about Instagram, but before we do that, I thought what might be helpful is to give a little bit of an introduction about Instagram to show a little bit of the things that we're seeing. So before I start, a super important question: who here is using Instagram? Can you hold your phones up if you, yes, this is amazing. Cool, while you have your phones out, I want you to go to Instagram, open Instagram, and I actually want you to follow along while I'm going through this, because we'll share a lot of examples, and Instagram is just so visual that it gives you a chance to play around a little bit. And I think if you haven't started following at least 5 new accounts by the time I'm done, I have not been doing my job up here. So the first one that I want you to go to is Amy, A-M-Y. That's my account. And I have you go to my account, not just because I get more followers that way, which does sometimes help, but because I think Instagram gives you the best introduction to someone that you can possibly get. You get these little windows into who someone is, what the things are that they care about. And so if you've ever been in a presentation or a meeting with me in the past, you know that I always start by showing photos from my Instagram profile. So today, if you're in a meeting with me, I still start with Instagram, but I actually don't start with my profile. I start with my stories. And I start with my stories because these are the everyday moments. These are the ones that feel much more personal, and these are the ones that almost make you feel like you're a little bit closer to experiencing these moments with me. And so again, it helps you get to know who I am and helps you build a deeper connection. And I think that really is the power of visual communication. And when we think about the technology that we have today, it's enabling us to share in ways that are more expressive and more immediate than ever before. And that's changing the way that you and I communicate and connect. And it's actually changing as consumers, changing the way that we expect to engage with a brand. So I've been able to see the shift firsthand from being at Instagram. I started when we were 6 people, way back in the early days of Instagram. We were in an office in San Francisco that was like maybe the size of this stage. And part of my role at the time, which is actually still part of my role today, is helping businesses understand how to use Instagram. And how many of you that raise your hand, how many of you follow a brand or a business? Yes, amazing. How many of you actually are a brand? You're a marketer or an entrepreneur or a small business, your own brand on Instagram? It's fantastic. I think that speaks to the fact that brands have always been an important part of this community. And they've always been using Instagram to connect and engage in really human ways. And so what I wanted to take you guys through today is a little bit of how we're seeing the shift in visual communication and how we're seeing consumers and especially how we're seeing brands start to interact. And so if you look at kind of where we've come today, we've come a long way since the early days of Instagram. This is a common site that you'll see. And we see 2.4 billion smartphones being used all around the world. But it's the cameras on those smartphones that are actually driving the conversations that we have. We actually see 90% of the photos that are shared online are shared from a smartphone. So again, much like you see in this image, when you're somewhere where you want to communicate or capture kind of a moment or an experience, you reach for your camera first to share that. And we're really seeing that this is impacting kind of the way that we communicate. And we're seeing at Instagram, we're at the forefront of the shift in visual communication. But with Instagram, it's not just about that camera. It's about how people are connecting with one another. And we see Instagrammers coming to our platform to share a little bit about who they are. And they're also coming to connect and to engage. And that breadth of visual communication, all of the ways that they're doing that, is expanding so dramatically. When you think of, we started with just an image in a feed. And now you have things like video. You see us introducing things like ephemerality. You see augmented reality. You see direct messaging that's led through visual communication. And it's really changing the way we communicate. And I think you see that power of that connected camera start to be reflected in the numbers and how fast our community is growing. And I think if you take these in a couple of chunks, we'll start 700 million people using Instagram every single month, 400 million using it every single day. For me, that's just mind-blowing to think how fast this community has grown and to see what an important part Instagram has become for so many people. The stat in the middle, 80% beyond or kind of outside of the US. It sounds like kind of a weird one that we would share, especially when we're standing here outside of the US. But I think we always point it out because you see a lot of tech companies that start in Silicon Valley and you kind of just assume they're very kind of US-centric or not really global in nature. And I think the difference between Instagram is that when we started, 50% of the community was actually outside of the US. And that number has continued to grow. And I think that's so much of the power of Instagram to be able to connect a global community on that scale. And then finally, 15 million businesses and 1 million active advertisers. And this is kind of the world that I live in every day. So these are the numbers that get me really excited. And I especially love to see these numbers grow, partly because it means that I'm keeping my job and we're keeping the lights on, but also because it means that businesses and brands are really getting value out of our platform. And we see them really using Instagram to grow their own business, which is really exciting. And so if we take a step back and we think about these numbers, I think the question is probably what are people doing on Instagram? And we wanted to unpack that just a little bit. So I'd kind of bucket it into 3 different areas. I think people are really coming to Instagram to connect around their passions and to connect with interests. We also see them coming to spark exploration. They come with this mindset of discovery. And finally, probably the most obvious, people are coming to immerse visually on Instagram. And we'll dig into what a few of these different areas mean. And the first is this idea of passions. And on average, we see 50% of the accounts that people follow are actually people that they don't know personally. So for all of you who raise your hand who are new users on Instagram, if you're still just following your mom, your brother, and your 3 best friends, like you're doing it wrong. The power of Instagram is in your ability to connect with these interests, to connect with these passions, and to connect with those global communities. And we did a study recently where we looked at how people are using Instagram and why. And we found all of these people who are sports enthusiasts and fashionistas, and probably most relevant for here, auto enthusiasts. And we asked a lot of questions about what they're doing on Instagram. And you start to see things like if you look at sport is massive on Instagram. We have 1 in 3 people on Instagram actually follow a sports-related account. And 54% of them say they use Instagram to get updates from their favorite players. You see things like 62% of people who are using Instagram to build excitement for upcoming trips. And again, if we take it back to kind of where we are today, if you think about automotive and auto enthusiasts, 59% say they're influenced by Instagram when purchasing a car, which is pretty big, but really exciting to see how all these passions come to life. I think the thing that's like really exciting for me, especially coming from that startup mindset, is when you think about what this means for entrepreneurs, you think about what it means for small businesses, where, if you started 5 or 10 years ago, when you get started and you have an idea, you have to prove there's like some kind of addressable market, right? That there are people out there who want your products and your services. And that makes it pretty hard if you want to have something that's a pretty niche product or service. But when you think about what platforms like Instagram are doing to really open up and give access to a global community, now all of a sudden, all those products and those services that are really niche in nature now have scale. And you're able to find like-minded people. The other piece that we talked about is this idea of exploration and this idea of discovery. And I think this is very true on Instagram, but it's more broadly, I think, just shows the shift that we're making in a world that's more and more mobile. When you think about what the experience used to be like to go online, when you have to sit down at your desktop computer and you like dial up and you just like wait forever and there's like spinning dials, you like go to the website, you're typing in something, you wait even longer, like by the time you find the answer to whatever you're searching for, like you're done and you just want to get out of there. And I think now we live in a world where you have your mobile device, you have access to the answer to any question you can imagine before you even ask it. You can get that answer right away, and then you're left thinking like, well, what else do I do? Right? And I think people are now in this mindset where they want more and more content coming to them. They want to discover more. They want things that are more curated. And Instagram is an incredible place for that to happen. We see if you're using Instagram, the tab, not like your feed, but the tab right next to it is the Explore tab. This is a place where we curate a lot of content that we think might be interesting to you. And we see people, 100 million people, actually using this tab every single day. So we know people are going and trying to find interesting content. And we often, I like to think of Instagram a little bit as like a rabbit hole. Like you dive into a post and then you keep clicking on different things that you find and you end up 10 minutes later, like, I'm not actually sure how I got here, but you find the most incredible content along the way. The other thing, one of the new features that we've just launched recently that kind of taps into this idea where you're discovering content all the time and how do you actually keep track of it all, is the ability to save posts. And we did this because we found 25% of people on Instagram were sending a direct message to themselves of screenshots of things that they found in the app. Like clearly there is a need and people want to be able to kind of save and collect all of the things that they're finding on Instagram. So we launched Save. On the first day, 25 million posts were actually saved on Instagram. Today, 46% of people have saved at least one post. And again, if you tie it back to kind of that brand element for any of you guys who are marketers here, 29% of those saved photos are actually from a brand. I think it really shows how well brands fit into this community and how engaging the content is that people actually want to connect and to interact. The other feature that we're actually just testing, but kind of still goes along this idea of discovery and exploration, is really thinking about how we enhance product exploration or shopping in some sense. And you think about kind of what the online shopping experience is on mobile today. You often go almost what it feels like the kind of the shop window straight into transaction. And I think we know that there's so many steps in between there where you're considering different options and you're trying on different things and you're getting different opinions, and there's a whole lot of consideration that happens there. So one of the really fun and exciting things that we're starting to look at is what that shopping experience might look like. So if you're familiar with Instagram, obviously most of you are, because you raised your hands, you know you can tag people in your posts. And so we're applying that same lens to think about what does that look like if we can actually apply tags to products in posts. So now when you have products in your post, you can add a tag. If you want to click on one of those tags, then it takes you into a page where you actually see a bit more detail. From there, you can actually click into the website. So really thinking about how each of these different steps, you can go a little bit deeper into discovery if you want to, but still how to keep it really lightweight and keep the momentum that you've got within discovery going. So this is a really fun area. We're just testing it right now, but should be super exciting to see where this goes. So all of this kind of the discovery and the passions, like it's all rooted in this idea of visual communication. And I talked a little bit about immersing visually, and I think that's always been something that's so core to Instagram. When you think about that experience that you go for, right? You open Instagram and you just get lost in those moments that people are sharing. And I think that has never been more true than what you see with stories. And so we introduced stories just over a year ago. What we found is that people were starting to be really curated about the things that they're sharing in their feed. It goes back to kind of what I was talking about when I opened up, of just the feed becomes almost like a gallery, right? Those are really precious photos because those are photos that live on forever, and those are photos that represent you. And what we wanted to do was really create a space where people felt like they're more free to share not just those big highlights, but everything in between. And so stories, if you dig into stories, there are two things that I think are especially important to note about stories and that drive a lot of the dynamics. The first is that it's ephemeral. You'll see that when you post a story, it will like click through all of the stories that you post. It automatically kind of goes through those, through your whole story. If you post an image, it lasts for 5 seconds. If you post a video, it can be up to 15 seconds, and you can post as much of that content as you want to. But after 24 hours, it disappears. Once it's gone, it's gone. And I think that removes a lot of the pressure that you get with the permanence of photos. And you'll also note when you're looking at a story, there's actually no way to like the story. There's no like social validation that comes from it. All there is a little box at the bottom that says message. So you can actually send a message back to someone. I think the other really interesting element of stories is that it is fully immersive. Well, I think Instagram has always felt really immersive anyway. I think you look at something that is completely full screen, it captures all of your attention, and it really helps bring you into these moments. When you think about these moments that are much more raw and like completely immersive, you feel almost like you're in those moments with people. And I think it creates this really incredible canvas. And we actually see one of the surprising things with stories, 60% of stories are actually watched with sound on, which is not typical mobile behavior. Like if you think about the things that you're usually doing on your mobile device, you usually have the sound off because you're in a meeting or you're sitting in my session in a convention and you don't want people to know that you're on your phone or you don't want to distract them. But with stories, we're actually seeing the opposite, where the majority of people are actually watching with sound on. And I think that pulls you into those stories even more. And so what we see when you remove the permanence and you add this immersiveness, I think you see this really incredible creative canvas emerge. And so you see really fun examples, people just like really letting go, I think, and embracing that creative freedom. So you see things like stitching boomerangs together, so you have floating friends, I think is what they call it, or like really fun use of stickers that just kind of bring photos to life. Ukes, which it stopped playing now, but if you saw Ukes, it was actually, the thing that I love about this one is it was 2 videos that were actually stacked right on top of each other. And so they're assets that you kind of already have, and you've probably watched them in a different way. But when you see them stacked together, it's almost like an entirely new experience. So really fun to see those things coming to life. And then this last one is from a guy named Steve McMenemy. If you look him up on Instagram, because I know you're still on your phones, S. McMenemy is his name. But he does these really fun stories where he'll take a photo, but he'll actually animate over it, so it makes it look like it's something else. And what we've seen in terms of like kind of how people are engaging, 250 million people are using stories every single day, which to kind of go at that speed in just over a year is pretty incredible to see how many people actually want to engage in this way. Layla mentioned 32 minutes is how long people under 25 are spending on Instagram, and that number has gone up from what we've talked about previously. So where I think one of the things that you might have thought happens, like when we introduce something like stories, is that people will just shift from the way that they're using feed into using stories, when actually it's starting to grow the time that they're spending overall. And finally, the last point I think that's really interesting is that 1 in 5 stories actually gets a direct message. So again, to see that communication and to see that behavior starting to become more and more prevalent within people to start communicating more directly. So we're really excited to see where Stories is going. I thought just to kind of wrap things up, I'll give a few tips and some of the trends of how we're seeing brands start to use stories, because creative examples are always really fun to look at. And I would break this again into kind of 5 different areas. Stories that intrigue, that kind of pull you in, stories that highlight different products or features, stories that teach. Stories are perfect when you think about ways to teach people something. Stories that are native and using native tools, and finally, stories that connect. And I'll go through really quickly just a few highlights from each of these. So the first one is stories that intrigue. And I think this is something that's always been like naturally a part of how you're using Instagram, right? When you think about like you're showing backstage content or kind of breaking news. But again, this is like a really fun new space to try to do something like that. So if you look at the example from Foodora, where you think you're just at a picnic, but it zooms out and you're actually in like completely different places, ways to just give a little bit of a twist, something that's a little bit unexpected. The second example, this is actually a super cool campaign. It's from Renault, and they base this on the insight that people are actually having much more meaningful conversations in their cars. So they're starting, I think it's a year-long campaign where they're putting cameras in the cars of 2 different Instagram community members, and they're going to follow them along on their kind of daily journey. But the way that they're using stories is just kind of giving a little bit of a highlight so that you know what's coming, and a little bit of a teaser. And finally, the last example up here, Mercedes-Benz. They are killing it on Instagram. And this is one of my favorite stories. So they did a behind the scenes and a photo shoot for their new G-Wagon. And you always see behind the scenes kind of photos, but when you put it into the stories format, I think it just, you actually really feel like you're there on the shoot with them. And you really feel like you're getting this inside kind of view. So I think really cool to see how they're using it to just build a bit of excitement, so that then when you see the actual campaign come out, you feel like you have a little bit of an inside view. The second thing that I talked about was stories that highlight. So how you think about highlighting either a specific product or a feature or something that's coming out. This one is from Flume, and I love the way that they just do an overlay so you can only see part of the image, but by zooming in on certain parts, it really helps kind of bring it to life. You see the example from Furla in the middle, which is an ad for their new Monster bag, which again, they could have just put it on a white background and everyone would love these bags anyway, but thinking about really fun ways to bring the product to life. And then finally, BMW. I think this is another great example because I'm guessing, like I've watched this probably 10 times, and I'm guessing this is probably the same video that they would use in many other places, whether it's kind of TV or other channels that they're running videos like this. But when you see it in this format, where you're getting just kind of this sliced view into it, it really highlights some of the different features of the car, really makes you feel like you're getting a completely different perspective. So I think stories is a really fun way to think about like how just changing the perspective changes the way you're seeing something. Stories that teach. That was the third one that I talked about. This is one of my favorites. Stories, because you can flip back and forth. And if you're using stories, you can tap to go forward or tap to go backwards. So it makes it really easy to show different steps. And we see a lot of really creative ways that people are using this. Jessica Alba is promoting the Honest Company, and so showing different ways that you can use some of the products and features. Again, I think shows that like just because you're a brand doesn't mean it has to feel super professional. It can feel really in the moment and can feel really natural. You can also do something really simple, like Samsung, where they're teaching you that the phone is waterproof. Like you don't have to go through a whole 10-step tutorial. Like it's pretty easy to get what they're trying to teach you in this one. And then the last one, food is such an obvious example when you think about recipes, think about teaching people how to do something. Really exciting to think and to see some of the ways that people are getting creative about this. The next one, this one's really fun. Thinking about ways that brands are tapping into some of the native tools and the features that we have in Instagram stories. So the first one is taking advantage of that progress bar that goes across when you're watching a story, just adding a really fun element. The second one, if you hold down on stories, it pauses the story. So you see all kinds of these games popping up where you choose what's for lunch, women choosing what their like engagement ring style is, choosing where you're going to go on your next vacation. Really fun to just get people to interact and engage with the stories. And finally, again, one that's super relevant and one of my favorites for here, a garage door in stories. And when you swipe up, you have the swipe up feature. It opens up into the car, which is like kind of like it's in your garage. So really cool to see. And then finally, the last piece is stories that connect. So just thinking about how the things that you're posting in your stories actually connect with all of the things that you're doing across Instagram, whether that's in your feed, whether that's in live. This is an example from J. Crew that just shows some of the things that they're posting in their feed, taking advantage of some of the product tagging, but even if it wasn't a product tag, just some of the things that are kind of the permanent representation of them. The stories in the middle is for their pink campaign. They launched a new line of sunglasses and they had a 24-hour special. So they shared it on stories because it lasts for 24 hours. And then the last one, the video is not playing, but it's actually a live. So how you think about bringing people into like that fashion show experience. So really great to see like how those all connect. And I think the thing that like I'll leave you with in all of this, like if you look at all those examples, none of them are the same, right? Like there is no right answer to how you use stories and how you use Instagram. And I think everyone is still learning in this space. But what is like completely obvious to me is that the ways that we're communicating and the ways that we're connecting are changing at an increasingly rapid pace. And so the very best advice that I think I can leave you with is just to experiment, to have a bit of fun and to just embrace the creative freedom that comes with ephemerality. So hopefully this was helpful. I'm going to have a chat with Guy. We're going to talk through a little bit more of Instagram. So if you have questions, feel free to send them, and we will we'll pick them to go through together. Hello, welcome.
So do you actually get paid to work at Instagram?
Isn't it like the best job you've ever heard of?
I would think.
I know.
Do you need a brand ambassador?
We always need brand ambassadors.
You want to reach a more older male demographic? Let me know. Okay.
Absolutely.
So my name is Guy Kawasaki, and I'm the chief evangelist of a company called Canva. I'm also a Mercedes-Benz brand ambassador. Many of you may know of me from my work at Apple's, where I was Apple's chief evangelist. So that's my background. We have the Slido up, and I have some questions too. We are under extreme time constraints, so we have about 15 or 20 minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to rip into it.
Let's do it.
My perspective on panels like this is I would like it to be a learning experience so that at the end of this session, you'll say, oh, I'm going to change what I do in Instagram. I'm going to do this differently, do this better because of what I've learned at the panel. Okay, so that's my perspective. If you want this kind of futurist, strategic 50,000 square foot view, go to the other panel. This is tactical on the ground, okay?
I love it. Okay,
so I see this is a question that I also had is, what's your favorite filter?
This is one of my favorite questions, and I'm going to give you my absolute favorite one, and then I'll give you kind of a more practical, real answer that can be helpful. My favorite filter is one called Gotham. Does anyone remember Gotham? Who's been using it for a really long time? So what we find is sometimes we'll go through the filters that we have on Instagram and we'll take some out if there are ones that like not a lot of people are using. And so Gotham is one that we used to have and removed. It no longer exists. So there was a whole campaign on Instagram for a while of people saying bring Gotham back, of which I was a part. And even though I worked at Instagram, I still couldn't get it back. So it was really sad. One of our engineers actually built it for me once. So for my birthday, he actually built it into the code where it said literally in the code, if you're at Amy, like if you're that account, then you have access to Gotham. So I had it back in the app. But somewhere along the way, someone decided that's not so stable for our code. So that no longer exists.
So it's gone?
It's gone.
You're employee number 6 and you can't get a filter?
I know.
Oh my.
I know. But okay, so
we need to talk.
I know. The real answer about filters, Filters, the background of filters, like why they started, is actually when we started Instagram, the cameras on phones were not that great, right? So you actually needed a filter to make it look a lot better. And so filters were something that everybody was using and using pretty heavily. And I think over time, now that cameras have gotten better, we actually don't use filters quite as much. So you see a lot of the filters turning into ones that are a little bit more subdued or kind of lighter in nature. So my favorite one, I use Moon, which is actually a black and white one, and then I turn the dial way down, so it just does a little bit of saturation, and then I turn the brightness up and I add a little bit of structure. So it's kind of like my own mix of what I do.
Okay.
And we also see the really quick, other quick answers, face filters on stories. So that's another place where we start to see less of filters and more of just creative tools being used. So my favorite face filter is the koala filter.
Just for your information, my favorite is Hefe.
Is it?
Yeah, I like deep saturation, high contrast. That's an old people's filter. So I really want to know, from your perspective, what makes a good photo? What makes a good story? What makes a good live video?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I think a lot of people are asking because now you have so many different parts of Instagram, and it's kind of like, how do they all fit together, and what do I do in all of these spaces? So I think for me, and this is kind of my view, there's no one right answer, but I think for me, the photo that goes on your profile for me is kind of the one photo that's like the moment you want to remember in a way, right? So for me, like what makes a good one is that it tells a story and it kind of captures a moment. It's something that people will learn something a little bit about you when they go away.
I meant a good photo in general, not the profile photo. What makes a good photo on Instagram?
Oh, what makes a good photo? Well, some of the tips. I mean, it's kind of what makes a good photo on Instagram is just what makes a good photo in general. So if you think about things like the focal point, right? Like what are people going to see when they look at the photo? And things like lighting, like is it actually set up in the right way? So like a lot of those really tactical, practical tips that like you would use as a photographer are the same kind of things you can think about on like what makes a good Instagram photo. But I think, again, like if you move into kind of the story space, I think that's a very different feel on the kind of things that people are posting. And it's like a much more personal space. And so there, I think for me, like what makes a really good story, we see so much movement, like a lot of video, because that is really a space where you can just kind of like pan around and kind of capture what you're doing. And I think it, even more than photos, brings you into feeling like you're in that moment. And the other thing about video is sound. So I mentioned this, but like you'll notice it if you're watching stories, if you're posting your own stories, the videos that you watch that don't have sound, because you can post it without sound. So like the ones that don't have sound are kind of cool to see, but like then when you hear the sound, you all of a sudden feel like you hear what's going on around you and like you feel like you're in that moment. So like definitely sound. And then the other thing is like with stories, just looking for ways to turn everyday moments into something that's really fun. So like the video that I showed with like, it was just a cat sitting there looking around, but like you put the stickers of the eyes and all of a sudden it's just like really funny video that you watch probably 10 times. Okay. So I think just like thinking about ways to make it really fun.
You see that first question? Stories appears to be influenced by Snapchat and how it's used. How has the rapid growth of Snapchat changed how and what you're working on Instagram? You want to answer that question?
Yes, I got this one. We get this one a lot.
34 people want to answer.
Common question. And it is one that we've talked about, I think, because we think a lot about the format of stories and really thinking about it in the sense that it is a format. Right, when you think about Feed, Feed launched originally and is now something that's been adopted by a number of different platforms and has become just a common way to consume. Same thing with hashtags, right? It's become something that like is just an ingrained kind of way we communicate. So we think about stories very much in that same way of like it is a format. But I think when you see stories come to life, whether that's on Instagram, on Snapchat, on any other platform, you have to do it in a way that's really natural and feels right for that experience, right? So like how does stories come to life on Instagram and in a way that's different from others? One of the things that we think a lot about is the community, like how people are using, how people are engaging with our products. And one of the filters, we just launched a face filter recently that's a rainbow filter. And so you'll see it, that's actually something that started within the community. And you would find people like chasing these rainbows or getting prisms so that they would kind of like project a part of a rainbow, like on their face, on like different parts of them. And so we created a filter where you can actually like go and do that yourself. So it's really thinking about like what are the ways that the community are using these products and how do we make that our own?
I just want you to notice something, that she didn't exactly answer the question I asked, but I just want to point this out. This is a learning moment for you. So when you're on a panel and the moderator asks you a question about Snapchat and you never mention it in your answer and you go on and you talk about your product, that's a very smooth transition. You should learn how to do that. That's yeah, I congratulate you. That is a God-given skill, don't get me wrong. You have a future in politics. When I ask the question, I'm not going to let you off the hook, though. So can you, so that we have inspiration, what are some great examples? What's like, you sit there and you say, my God, this company really gets it, knows how to use Instagram well.
Yeah, oh my God, I have so many. I was gonna make a slide that just like flipped through all of like some of my favorite accounts. And I have like the range of them from like just kind of everyday people to like brands who are doing really interesting things. And again, like I think about brands kind of all day long. Some of my favorites, let me think. One is a woman named Darian Volkova. She's a Russian ballerina in St. Petersburg. And so if you look at her account, like definitely look at her account. She shows this really inside view into what's happening in like the really personal stories, and you almost feel like you understand kind of the trials of going through that. Another one that's like the complete opposite. Does anyone follow Kirby Jenner? This one's one of my favorite ones. It's kind of a spoof account where this guy has created an account and he says he's Kendall Jenner's twin, and he photoshops himself into all of these images and like actually videos sometimes with her that are like so well done. It's unbelievable. So I just like, it cracks me up to see them. On a more serious note, like from a brand perspective, we're in the auto show, so like examples of some like car brands who are doing it well. Mercedes, I said, is a great example. I think one of the things they think about, you actually probably know this better than I do, but one of the things they think about on their account is showing a little bit more of like the car of the future, kind of positioning them a little bit more future looking, and so they'll show a lot of concept cars and a lot of kind of where they're going. But they also do a great job, like if you saw that example with stories, of like immediately testing and experimenting with all of the different things that we're coming out with. And I said it before, but I think like we're moving so fast that like if you don't keep up and you don't just start experimenting, you're going to be so far behind that like how do you ever catch up? And I think they do an incredible job of just like really staying on top of what we're doing.
You mentioned this adoption of new, story format or whatever. So I sit there and I come to a car show like this, and I have my phone, and I don't know, should I take a picture? Should I do a live video? Or should I do a story? And I'm thinking, well, if I do a story, it's so temporary. And then but if I do a picture, that's like old school. And if I do live video, I don't know about the connectivity. So how do you go through this decision process where, there's like so much, there's so much eye candy here. Which method do you use?
Well, the answer is all of them. Is the best
also
answer.
a smooth answer. Yeah.
But I will say, the way that I would think about it if I was here, when you're going about the day, one, I guess maybe we'll start kind of backwards from your question. So live. For me, I would use a live for like a specific thing that I want to capture, right? So if it's like a big car reveal, or like you're walking around kind of a section where you're looking at different cars, like to bring someone into this like one specific experience, then I would use live. And the key with live too is thinking about the amount of time you're spending on live, because like live will come up while you're live, but then once you stop being live, then it's gone, right? And so, and now it will last 24 hours, but still like to be there in the moment. And so it takes a while for people to notice that you're doing it. So the longer, actually, it's kind of counterintuitive, but the longer you're doing a live, the more people will figure out that you're doing it and will kind of start watching. So for live, I would think about like a specific kind of event that you're trying to capture. Stories, I would do stories kind of throughout while I'm walking around, and the way that I think of stories is kind of you get the snapshot throughout the entire day. Like you can capture these like little bits throughout the day that like when you put them all together, they make a story, and it kind of tells you what you're going through. And I also think of stories a little bit like your inner monologue. Like that's where your like inner monologue can come out, right? Like you post a beautiful photo, but on stories, it's like, oh my gosh, like, did you see this? Or can you believe that like this thing happened? Like it's much more real and kind of your own voice. So I would think about like what those stories are that come together. And then the one, like kind of the photo that I would post on my profile is really like, what is the moment that I want to remember? Like, what is the image that I captured that kind of helps me remember this experience? And that I would keep on my profile, because you're going to see that every time you go back. So again, that's my own view, but that's how I use them.
I think we should take this question. How do you feel about Instagram having an addiction potential and being a threat, right? A threat to self-esteem.
Yeah, definitely. I think this is, this is a big challenge, I think, that we just have more broadly, even outside of Instagram. But it's one that we think a lot about for us. And for us, like, it's really important. I think that Instagram is a place for kindness, which it sounds kind of cheesy to say, but like it really is. And I think we have a responsibility, or kind of an ability, to help impact this in a way. And the thing that's incredible about Instagram, I talked about this earlier, but like, you really can connect with passions and with interests, and there is an entire global community. And so regardless of what you want to do, you can find people like who are doing that. Within the community, there are countless examples of people who are sharing their experience of going through eating disorders, or trying to help with the process of like kind of like transgender advocates, and just like really anything you can imagine that creates a supportive and inclusive culture.
Okay.
And so from our perspective, it's like, how do we just help make sure that more of that can happen? How do we help make sure that we're fostering a community where those kind of voices are heard, and where Instagram is a place where you can go for support?
Okay. How about, we've been talking about best practices mostly. How about the most common mistakes? Stuff that you should definitely avoid.
Yeah, good question. This is one we talk about often with brands. You'll see a lot of times, like, brands and even people will get really hung up on followers and on likes and follows. And I think a lot of times, like, those don't necessarily mean anything. What's really important is actually like the story that you're trying to tell, and if you're actually kind of like getting your message across, and if you're actually building connections with those people. So often, like, you'll see like a car brand, right, will post like a cat video. And they're like, well, everyone's going to love it.
Really?
It's like hilarious. Everyone's going to like it. I got like thousands of likes on this photo, but like, it doesn't represent anything about your brand. So I think it's like coming back to like, what is the story you actually want to tell? So that is like a big one of just really thinking about the content that you're posting. Think about the other thing that brands sometimes don't do well is like engaging within the community. It is an incredible community. You post photos, you post videos, like, people are going to leave comments, and you can actually like engage back with them and start a dialogue. And Instagram is an incredible place for brands and people to kind of feel like they're on the same level. And so to think about how do you engage and how do you give people this kind of access into you, I think is just an incredibly unique opportunity.
Okay. We're near. How about one more question? Okay. One more question. Will you ever let me post from my desktop?
Maybe.
Maybe.
The answer I would give, we're always trying to understand what the community wants to do. So I think if enough people are saying like, I need to post from my desktop.
How many of you want to post from your desktop? Oh, I'm wrong.
There's a few.
I guess. Oh, I would.
But I think it's a legitimate question, though, for sure. I think the thing is, we started as a mobile company, right? We were mobile first. Like, that's where you're engaging, that's where you're posting, and that's where we'll always continue to invest. But we'll start to think about what are the other things the community needs, and especially as you think about brands, a lot of times it's important for a brand. So I won't say we'll never do it. We'll listen to the community and see.
All righty. I think we're being pulled off. So thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much, Amy, for providing all these insights.
Yeah, thank you.
And have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Amy Cole and Guy Kawasaki. So now please stick around. In just a few minutes, we'll continue here with the topic of brain hacking. Miriam Meckel will be here, and she'll be presenting some of her research that she'll cover in her next book, with basically the question, what if technology allows us to limitlessly enhance our brains and ourselves? It's going to be super exciting. Please stick around in just a few minutes. Thank you.